Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt invisible? Not because you lacked kindness, but because of it. You speak gently, give generously, avoid conflict, and yet somehow you are the one others overlook, test, or quietly push aside. Meanwhile, those who lead with coldness, who draw sharp lines without apology, seem to command immediate respect. It's a contradiction that cuts deep. Why does the world so often honor distance more than warmth? The answer isn't easy, but it is real. There is a hidden order to human behavior, one that rewards clarity over compliance, presence over people-pleasing. And until you learn to hold your ground, no amount of kindness will shield you from being diminished. This isn't about becoming hard or cruel. It's about reclaiming what you've been quietly surrendering, your authority. In this video, we'll explore what it truly means to be respected in a world that often mistakes goodness for weakness. So, if something in you knows it's time to stop being overlooked, stay with me. What you're about to hear may not only explain your struggle, it may help you end it. The illusion of kindness alone. Let's talk about one of the most dangerous misconceptions we carry through life: the belief that kindness on its own commands respect. It's a beautiful idea, but it's also incomplete. In a Stoic's world, goodness without strength is like a sword without a blade, noble in appearance, but ultimately useless in battle. People don't respect kindness in isolation. What they respond to, what truly arrests their attention, is the presence of strength beneath that kindness. Not brute force, not aggression, but quiet, immovable strength. A core that doesn't waver, a mind that doesn't bend for the sake of approval. Many of us fall into the trap of thinking that if we treat others well, avoid conflict, remain generous, and make sacrifices, we will naturally earn respect. But Stoicism teaches us otherwise. Respect is not born from intention. It is drawn from the perception of personal authority, and authority in the eyes of the world is forged not by how kindly you speak, but by how clearly you draw the line. Authority is presence. It's the posture that doesn't shrink. The stillness in your silence when someone tries to provoke you. The gaze that holds, not because it's angry, but because it doesn't need to explain itself. When you set clear boundaries and hold them without rage, without justification, you send a signal to the world, and that signal is unmistakable. Not here, not with me. The Stoics knew this instinctively. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In other words, when someone tests your dignity, the answer is not to scream louder. It's to stand so firm in your values that no attack can move you. The human mind, flawed and reactive as it is, tends to register calm firmness with more awe than volatility. And yes, it often registers a form of fear, but not fear of violence, fear of crossing a line. It senses you will defend without hesitation. Now imagine the opposite. The one who always says yes, the one who nods, smiles, explains too much, stays silent to preserve the mood. They are not seen as kind, they are seen as available, as permissive. And in a world that feeds off boundaries to test its limits, where there is too much permission, exploitation always follows. This is not theory, it's human nature, not psychology, but the Stoic understanding of how people respond to energy and conduct. As Epictetus said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid," meaning if asserting yourself makes others uncomfortable, so be it. That discomfort is not your burden, it is their awakening. So, where does that leave you? Does this mean kindness has no place, that we must walk through life armored, unreachable? No. but it means your kindness must never come at the expense of your self-respect. The Stoic does not flinch from compassion, but neither does he extend it blindly. He measures where his energy flows and ensures that his actions are rooted in principle, not in the fear of being disliked. Machiavelli once observed that people forget favors easily, but remember strength indefinitely. And though we are not rulers or princes, we live in a world where social power is still at play in workplaces, in friendships, in families. If you are always trying to be liked to smooth things over to earn approval through sacrifice, you may be appreciated, but you will not be respected. And without respect, all kindness eventually gets mistaken for weakness. You are not here to be soft clay, molded by the hands of others. You are here to hold your form, even under pressure. You are here to speak kindly, yes, but with clarity, to say no without apology, to step away from disrespect without needing the last word. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming grounded. It's about aligning with the kind of quiet strength that speaks for itself, that commands a room without ever raising its voice. That, my friend, is the essence of Stoic leadership, not over others, but over yourself. At the end of the day, respect is not given to the one who tries to please everyone. It is granted to the one who draws their boundaries with calm, stands their ground in silence, and lives not for applause, but for alignment with their values. When kindness becomes a trap. Let's talk about the silent conflict that eats away at many people who strive to live with compassion, the cruel paradox of being kind in a world that often exploits it. Perhaps no one told you this growing up. You may have been raised to believe that decency was a shield, that if you treated others with empathy, made sacrifices, forgave quickly, and gave more than you received, life would somehow reward you. But the Stoics, ever unflinching in their clarity, would have offered a sobering reminder. Life does not bend to your intentions. It responds to your discernment. Because in the real world, kindness without boundaries is not admired. It's used. It becomes a signal, an open door, a whispered invitation to those who sense weakness, not as something to protect, but as something to consume. And make no mistake, predators do exist. Not the monstrous villains of ancient myths, but the ordinary ones cloaked in charm, in need, in perpetual chaos. These are the people who recognize kindness without strength and see it not as virtue, but as opportunity. In Stoic thought, virtue is not naive. It is guarded, principled and discerning kindness that cannot say no, that cannot walk away, that does not recognize when it is being manipulated. This is not true virtue. It is moral confusion, and while modern psychology might name this self-abandonment, a Stoic would call it a failure to align your actions with reason. Because reason, as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, is the governor of the soul. And when we allow guilt, fear, or people-pleasing to override it, we fall out of alignment with our nature. We stop being kind from strength and start being kind from fear. This is where the dilemma tightens. You begin to question yourself. Am I too kind? Too forgiving? Too available? But here's the real fracture. It's not that you're too good. It's that you've been conditioned to believe that self-erasure is a noble trait, that if you're always the one who understands, who gives, who yields, then somehow you're winning at morality. But the Stoics would challenge that. They would tell you that virtue, the highest aim of life, is not about being agreeable. It's about being in harmony with truth. And the truth is, this a goodness that abandons itself to protect others is not goodness. It's dependence. It's the quiet addiction to validation, to being needed, to being seen as the better person, even when that means sacrificing your own dignity. This is the psychological trap many fall into. You confuse being peaceful with being passive. You believe that if you just endure a little more love, a little harder, give a little extra, then maybe you'll be enough. But in Stoicism, peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of internal order. And when your inner boundaries are eroded in the name of kindness, what you're experiencing isn't virtue, it's collapse. You begin to shrink in your own eyes. Others notice it too. They stop respecting you, not because you're kind, but because your kindness comes without limits. And nothing erodes self-respect faster than realizing you've betrayed your own principles in order to maintain a false peace. Niccolo Machiavelli, often misunderstood, did not praise cruelty for its own sake. He simply observed a raw truth of human nature, that people remember those who enforce boundaries more than those who endlessly forgive violations. But let's translate that into Stoic terms. What he pointed to in his own way is that a virtuous life is not submissive, it is strategic. It's built on clarity, self-command, and the unshakable understanding that your soul is not for sale. You do not become cruel by learning to say no. You do not lose your light by choosing to walk away. You preserve it, because kindness, when tempered by wisdom and courage, becomes a force that demands respect, not pity. So if you've ever feared that becoming firmer, less available, or more self-protective would make you a colder person, remember this: the Stoics did not preach the eradication of feeling, they taught mastery. They did not condemn kindness, they demanded it be paired with discernment. They did not say withdraw from the world, they said know who you are when you meet it. The real question now is not whether kindness is valuable, it absolutely is. The question is whether your kindness is costing you your peace, your voice, your dignity. And if it is, then perhaps it is time to recalibrate, not who you are, but how you protect who you are. At the end of the day, kindness without wisdom is a vulnerability. But kindness with wisdom, that's power, that's virtue. That's the kind of presence the world cannot exploit. Power begins with clarity. Let's talk about what most people refuse to see, but what Niccolo Machiavelli saw with terrifying clarity: the raw, unvarnished reality of human nature. While many philosophers spoke of how men should be, Machiavelli stood apart as a Stoic, in disguise. A man who wrote not from wishful ideals, but from hard-earned truths carved out of betrayal, treachery, and the shifting sands of power. He wasn't a cynic, he was a realist. And in a world intoxicated by appearances, his refusal to romanticize human behavior made him dangerous to the naive and indispensable to those who sought true control. Machiavelli lived amidst the ruins of collapsing republics and corrupt courts. He saw firsthand that righteousness alone never safeguarded a man's position. What did clarity strategy? The ability to see not only what was said, but what was meant. He understood that in both politics and personal life, those who fail to recognize the true motives of others will inevitably serve those who do. And it was from this brutal recognition that the Prince, his most infamous work, was born. Some condemned him, others revered him. But the wise knew one thing: to ignore his insights was to walk blindly into ruin. One of his most misunderstood lessons was this: it is safer to be feared than loved. But this wasn't an endorsement of cruelty. It was a warning against fragility. Love, as most people experience it, is not stable. It depends on how useful you are, how agreeable, how willing you are to remain silent, accommodating, beneficial. That kind of affection, Machiavelli understood, vanishes the moment your interests diverge. Say no. Once, just once, and watch how quickly that love evaporates. Fear, on the other hand, when guided by wisdom and restraint, is different. It doesn't require maintenance through constant sacrifice. It doesn't depend on pleasing others. It creates a psychological boundary, a quiet sense of caution that says, "You may not cross here." This is not fear that breeds terror. It is fear that breeds respect, a kind of reverence rooted not in threat, but in presence, in silence, in your capacity to withdraw, to say less, to act, without explaining yourself. Marcus Aurelius himself wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live according to nature." And nature, real human nature, responds not to softness, but to strength under control. Machiavelli knew that when there is no fear, there is no restraint. And when people lose restraint, they show you exactly who they are, not their polished mask, but their deeper impulses. The impulse to take advantage, to test, to push limits. In this sense, the individual who inspires no fear, who radiates only warmth, availability and submission, invites their own downfall, because without a reason to hesitate, others won't. This is not pessimism. This is how the world works, and to pretend otherwise is to offer yourself up willingly to be broken. But even here, balance is everything. Machiavelli was not promoting tyrants. He warned that unchecked fear, when laced with cruelty, breeds rebellion. When a man becomes feared and hated, his power is already decaying. True respect, the kind that holds weight in any room, lies in harmony, in precision, in a demeanor so composed, so disciplined, that people instinctively tread carefully, not because you threaten them, but because they sense that you could, if needed. In Stoic terms, this is sophrosine, the virtue of measured self-governance. It's not about suppression, it's about refinement. You do not need to shout to assert your power. You do not need to dominate to command space. You simply need to govern yourself so fully that your mere presence carries consequence. That's what Machiavelli meant, and that's what the Stoics lived. So ask yourself this: are you ruling your life with clarity and discipline, or are you being ruled by the shifting tides of others' approval? Are you setting boundaries calmly or constantly apologizing for your standards? Do people hesitate before crossing you, or have they learned that they can trespass without consequence? Because if you don't define the rules of engagement, someone else will, and they will write those rules for their benefit, not yours. At the end of the day, power is not held by those who are the loudest or most feared, but by those who master themselves so completely that others sense without a word not to take them lightly. That's not manipulation, that's authority, and that's where respect begins. The quiet power of authority. Let's talk about something that most people misunderstand, the fine line between being feared and being hated, and why mastering that distinction is the foundation of true authority. Many imagine authority as loud, harsh, confrontational, but real power. Stoic power is quieter. It doesn't shout. It doesn't force. It simply is. You see, there are two extremes that destroy a person's presence in any relationship. The first is passivity, which invites manipulation. The second is tyranny, which breeds rebellion. Authority lives between those two, and that middle ground is not found by accident. It is forged deliberately through posture, discipline, and deep self-command. Being feared in the Stoic sense does not mean being aggressive or domineering. It means embodying a presence that others naturally respect, because your silence carries weight and your absence is felt. You do not need to raise your voice to be taken seriously. You do not need to control others to control the room. That's not power. It's desperation dressed as dominance, and it never lasts. Terror may silence people for a while, but it also breeds resentment. And resentment, as Niccolò Machiavelli once observed, is a slow poison that waits for the right moment to strike. So, what does it mean to be feared without being hated? It means this: your boundaries are so clearly defined that no one dares to cross them, not because they're afraid of punishment, but because they understand instinctively that to do so would cost them your presence, your respect, or your energy. Your standards are visible even in your silence. You don't need to explain them repeatedly. You simply live them. That is the mark of someone who governs themselves with precision. In your daily life, this doesn't show up in dramatic speeches or harsh ultimatums. It begins with small, consistent acts of clarity, saying no without apology, leaving a room when the energy turns toxic without excuse, ending a conversation when someone continues to test a limit you've already expressed. Not because you're angry, but because you are aligned with your values. Stoicism teaches us that virtue is not reactive, it's consistent. That consistency, when combined with restraint, creates an aura of latent power, the kind of energy that doesn't need to be flexed to be recognized. Others sense it, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. That's the art. It's not about intimidating others. It's about mastering yourself to such a degree that others know they cannot shape you. Your time, your attention, your energy. These are not freely given. They are earned. And when people realize this, they hesitate before stepping out of line. That hesitation is not fear of punishment. It's the quiet respect that comes from knowing you're someone who stands firm without needing to strike. This type of presence cannot be faked. It must be built. Slowly, it is formed in the moments you walk away instead of engaging, in the strength of your silence when others provoke, in the way you carry yourself when no one is watching. This is what separates the reactive from the respected, the stoic from the crowd. As Epictetus reminded us, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. But what happens when you do all this and still find yourself being tested, still feeling unseen, dismissed, or used? Then we enter deeper territory, not of tactics, but of truth. Because the final barrier to respect is not external, it's internal. If you tolerate subtle disrespect long enough, you begin to believe it's normal. You carry old patterns like armor, thinking they protect you, when in truth they trap you. This is the unexamined self, the part that avoids confrontation, not because of wisdom, but because of fear disguised as virtue. The Stoics teach us that true liberation begins with knowing ourselves. Without this self-awareness, even the strongest exterior crumbles under pressure. So in the next part, we will go beneath the surface, into the deeper layers where your boundaries were shaped, where your tolerance was learned, where your silence was mistaken for peace. And most importantly, we'll talk about how to rebuild, how to reforge yourself from the inside out, so that you no longer chase respect, but carry it effortlessly, because you've become the kind of person who would never settle for anything less. At the end of the day, authority is not about ruling others. It's about mastering yourself so completely that your presence alone teaches people how to treat you. And that is a power no one can take away. Return to yourself. Let's talk about the real battleground, the one not fought in boardrooms or conversations, but in silence behind your eyes, within your own mind. Because after all the talk of boundaries, authority, and respect, if something inside you still flinches at the idea of disappointing others, still fears being rejected for saying no, then the problem is not out there, it's within. And this is where true Stoic transformation begins. It's not enough to intellectually understand the importance of self-respect. You must confront the part of you that still equates silence with peace, that still confuses kindness with surrender. Many carry this conditioning from early life. Maybe no one ever said it outright, but the message was clear. Be good, be quiet, don't make waves. You were rewarded for compliance, praised for suppressing your will. Saying no was painted as selfish. Disagreement was seen as disrespect. And slowly, quietly, you learned that love was earned by making yourself smaller, that safety came from disappearing, that harmony was preserved by vanishing your voice. But the Stoics would have called this what it truly is, a betrayal of your nature. Because to deny your reason, to silence your convictions, is to live against the grain of your own soul. That's not virtue, it's slavery. Over time, this becomes a reflex. You say yes when your whole being says no. You stay silent when your instincts scream to speak. You tolerate what should never be tolerated. And every time you do this, you're not just compromising. You're declaring to the world, and worse to yourself, that your will is negotiable, that your boundaries are fiction, that you can be bent, shaped, erased, and people will respond accordingly. Because the world doesn't honor those who betray themselves. It uses them. The Stoics teach that respect must begin within. There is no Stoic authority without internal command. Marcus Aurelius never asked to be feared, yet he was respected because he lived in alignment with himself. He didn't just act, he embodied his principles. So if you don't believe you are worthy of protection, if you don't believe your voice carries weight, then no strategy, no posture, no philosophical armor will be enough. Authority begins with the conviction that your soul is sovereign, that your truth is not something to apologize for. This reconstruction does not begin with public declarations. It starts in quiet daily acts, in watching yourself carefully, in noticing when you shrink to fit the room, in recognizing when you smile to hide discomfort, when you make yourself agreeable, not because you want to, but because you fear what will happen if you don't. These are the cracks in your foundation, and they must be sealed with action, not with anger, but with lucidity, not with defiance, but with stillness. Say less, but mean more. Leave quietly when a line is crossed. Decline gently but firmly, and never ever justify your value. As you begin to walk differently in the world, be prepared. There will be resistance. Some will call you distant, others will label you cold. But this is not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of their discomfort, now that they can no longer mold you. Your new presence will expose those who thrived on your passivity. And yes, you will lose some people. But understand, losing those who depended on your silence is not loss. It is purification. What replaces them is worth far more. As you align more deeply with your internal clarity, your external world shifts. People who once dismissed you start to pause. Conversations that once drained you either evolve or end. You no longer chase respect. It finds you. Not because you demand it, but because you've become the kind of person who would never accept anything less. You are no longer accessible to those who only came to take. And as the Stoics taught, what is rare, what is guarded, what is disciplined, always holds more value. But even in this strength, a final challenge remains. One question that shadows every step of the journey. How do you wield this new power without becoming what you once despised? How do you stay clear but not cruel, firm but not hardened? How do you protect yourself without becoming a fortress no one can reach? That is the final layer, the one that ties everything together. At the end of the day, reclaiming your respect begins not with commanding others, but with ceasing to abandon yourself. And from that inner stillness, a new identity emerges, not louder, but deeper, not harsher, but unshakably clear. Choosing respect over love. Let's talk about one of the hardest but most liberating choices you'll ever make: the decision to stop chasing love and start commanding respect. There comes a moment when you must confront a brutal truth. The world will never value what you don't value in yourself. You can spend your life softening your edges, accommodating demands, lowering your standards in the hope that someone somewhere will finally see your worth. Or you can stop playing a game that was never meant to honor you and start moving with the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what they bring to the table. This doesn't require you to become cold or cruel. It doesn't require loud declarations or emotional walls. It requires presence, stillness, a gaze that says, enough. The Stoics taught that strength is not in outward force, but in inward control. And that control shows itself in the invisible boundaries you hold, not because you want to punish others, but because you've stopped allowing them to shape you. There is a kind of power that doesn't announce itself, but is immediately felt. It's in the silence that follows a firm no. It's in the way you walk away when disrespect appears. It's in your refusal to explain yourself to those who have already shown they're not listening. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this long before it became popular wisdom. He saw that love is fleeting, shaped by convenience, need, and self-interest. People love you when it benefits them, but that love is a house built on sand. When storms come, when you stop giving, when you set limits, that love quickly turns. Respect, however, when earned and maintained, becomes a fortress. It does not waver with mood. It does not vanish in discomfort. It remains, because respect is not built on what you give. It's built on what you won't compromise. This shift, choosing respect over the desperate search for acceptance, is the beginning of sovereignty. It is the moment you realize that your kindness must be armed, that giving is noble, but only when it comes from strength, not fear. You become whole. You stop acting from the fear of losing people and start acting from the clarity of not wanting to lose yourself. You love, but never at the expense of your peace. You forgive, but you remember. And above all, you walk away. Not because you're weak, but because some situations are simply unworthy of your presence. At the end of the day, the world will treat you exactly as you teach it to. And when you choose to be respected over being liked, everything changes. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally returned to who you were always meant to be. And now, let's be honest. Maybe for too long, you've been choosing silence over truth, comfort over clarity, and love over self-respect. But something inside you is shifting. You're starting to see that being kind, without strength, isn't peace. It's quiet, surrender. And the moment you stop abandoning yourself, the world begins to respond differently. Not with instant applause, but with a deeper kind of recognition. Respect. You don't need to change who you are. You simply need to stop hiding the stronger version of yourself that's already there. The one who sets standards, not just intentions. The one who speaks less, but means more. If this message spoke to something real inside you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts below with the words, "No more silence." You'll be surprised how many people feel the same. And if you're ready to keep walking this path to not just be heard, but honored, make sure you're subscribed. What comes next will take us even deeper. How to maintain inner strength when the people closest to you still test your boundaries. You've already taken the first step. Now keep going. You were never meant to be overlooked. You were meant to be unshakable.